Breakfast time. It's breakfast time, the start of our first full day on the road. Rob's been up since 7 o'clock, cooking a meal for anyone who wants it. The aroma pulls us out of our makeshift beds and arranges us around his portable stove. Our bowls are already full before we realise there's a catch. The trade-off for his supposedly free food? A 10-minute lecture from Rob about the power of rice. After dropping 2 large spoonfuls of his favourite staple into a bowl and handing it to me, Rob breaks a raw egg over the top. The yolk clouds over as I stir it in. To be fair, the food is delicious, and it is fun to watch Rob on his soapbox. At least there are some things he's willing to talk about at length. I stare across the circle at Lilith and Eve. The latter has spilled rice onto her top, and her friend is teasing her playfully. Eva sees me looking over, meets my gaze, and turns back to Lilith, her tone dramatically muted. I return to my food, making a point to seem attentive to Rob's speech. A minute later, the 2 girls decide they've finished their meal, and I quickly realise so have I. Devouring the last few bites, I place my bowl in the small tub of hot water next to the stove and casually wander over to their car. Lilith and Eve are facing away from me, silently packing up their sleeping bags. They refuse to look at me once I reach them, in a deeply conspicuous attempt at subtlety. I glance over at Rob. He's still talking at Bonnie, Clyde, and Apollo, asking them to guess what breakfast translates to in Japanese. Without answering, Eve reaches into the back seat and picks up a MacBook, the repository for all of Paranormican's footage. She presses play as Lilith and I huddle around her, blocking the view of any potential onlookers. The footage depicts a familiar road. Lilith and Eve must have dropped off the hitchhiker and just made the next corner. We can hear them talking about the experience, both terrified and thrilled at the events of the day. Eve reminds Lilith that they need to look out for the car. Lilith swears, and the camera immediately starts scouring the roadside. The abandoned car comes into view, with Eve slowing to a crawl and Lilith maxing out her camera's zoom function. A precious few details can be summarily gleaned. The car's windscreen and driver's side window are broken. The keys are still in the ignition. And once Eva overtakes the wreck, it's just possible to make out a dark stain soaked into the driver's seat. Just as the video starts to slow to a halt, the real Lilith shuts the laptop. I glance between them, trying to keep my voice as low as possible. Lilith nods her head towards the back of the car. It takes me a second to realise what she's getting at. I check on Rob once more. He's washing up the bowls and cutlery, exchanging small talk with Bonnie, oblivious to what's happening a mere 5 meters away. Lilith and Eve escort me to the trunk, reforming a secretive huddle before Eve lifts it open. A brown leather duffel bag sits front and center. It looks expensive, but worn, probably a few decades old. The pair gesture for me to unzip it. The bag isn't exactly full. I rummage through the loose contents, finding a few sets of good quality men's shirts and a pair of jeans. Further down, I find a small and well-used shaving kit. I'm starting to wonder what Lilith and Eve are so bent out of shape over when my hand hits the hard edge of a straight, rectangular object. Slowly and with great care, I manage to extract it from layers of wool and denim. It's a package, a heavy square block about the length of my forearm, neatly wrapped in brown paper. It seems completely unassuming, except for a black wire hanging from the underside, leading back into the bag itself. Lifting the wire, a black plug rises out and swings slightly in mid-air. With both girls watching me intently, I turn the package over in my hands. The wire connects to the charging port of an old Nokia 3210, which in turn is superglued to the package along with a few shards of exposed circuit board. Last, but certainly not least, are the words emblazoned on the brown paper. An imposing black typeface. C4 explosive. My mouth feels dry. When I look up, Rob's only a few steps away from us. I hide the C4 behind my back, dropping it into my satchel next to my notebook. I just manage to pull my fingers out of the way as Eve instinctively slams the trunk shut. Painfully aware of what's hanging at my side, I step away with Rob towards the now dismantled stove. I see Lilith and Eve are watching us go, their faces awash with apprehension. I can't say I feel the same. Despite my surroundings and the multitude of unsettling events, I don't have space in my head for apprehension right now. All anxiety is being slowly pushed out, its territory annexed by a bolstering sense of resolve. There are far too many strange things happening on this road, and even if it kills me, I'm going to find out what they all mean. We've packaged everything in the back of the Wrangler and are about to get back on the road when Ace comes up behind us. Rob turns around and I sense an icy shield raising as he curtly addresses our compatriot. The shield thaws. This isn't the Ace we've seen before, and Rob's perceptive enough to notice. He engages, albeit cautiously. Ace shuffles uncomfortably. Suddenly, he seems much younger. Ace starts to tremble, unable to meet Rob's eye. Rob stares at Ace in silence. Ace hangs his head, like a criminal facing judgment. Ace finally looks up, confused at Rob's words, searching the man's expression for clues. Rob grins at Ace, who manages to smile shakily back. Rob holds his hand out for Ace to shake. It's an offer of peace, or at the very least, an offer of terms. Ace accepts it, grimacing only slightly as he faces Rob's iron grip. 5 minutes later, and we're rolling into a deep valley, each member of the convoy appearing over the crest of the hill behind us. Everyone's present and accounted for, including Ace. We spent the next 2 hours in silence, with me typing up my notes and Rob navigating the sparse few turns that show up every now and then. Ace's testimony troubles me, perhaps because it stretches my favourite theory, that the game is an elaborate hoax perpetuated by Rob Guthard. I was content that the hitchhiker could have been an incredibly deft performer, but even if the man was a trained thespian, that doesn't make him capable of mind control. Ace could be insane, or maybe an actor himself, but those ideas sound exactly like the idle rationalizations I decried in Rob earlier. I'm not sure what my theory is at the moment. I keep working, hoping to type my way to revelation. A few lone trees have started to show up in the distance, towering wild pines with trunks as thick as barrels. Without my noticing, the trees grow slowly more and more numerous, and in that creeping way that landscapes change, it wasn't long until they spanned both sides of the road, encapsulating us in a deep, bright forest. Realizing I've recorded everything of substance, and with Rob concentrating on the drive, I have no choice but to lay back in my seat and watch the world roll by. Despite the pervasive strangeness of the left-right game, there is beauty on the road. Under the light of the canopy, the smell of pine needles permeates the air. I actually feel myself starting to relax. It only takes 3 words to change that. The words don't come from Rob. He's as quiet as always. They aren't spoken by the rest of the convoy either. The words are writ large in calligraphic gold paint, resting on a spotless white sign. Even from a distance, with the letters little more than a blur, I know what they're going to say. They're the words I've long dreaded since I switched off the radio. The words I spent a long, troubled night hoping I'd never see. Welcome to jubilation. It turns out there is room in my head for apprehension. Rob puts his radio back into the receiver. I try to ignore the distant knot in my stomach. The forest clears abruptly, like a parting curtain, to reveal a picture-perfect American town. An archetype almost to the point of self-parody. We've arrived in jubilation. There's no denying this town is beautiful. We're welcomed by a row of vibrantly coloured shops spanning the length of a long wide street. At the far end, an ornate grey-walled town hall proudly surveys its domain. The place is immaculate. I failed to find a solitary piece of litter on the sidewalk, a single smudge on the plate glass shop windows. Every inch of jubilation is pristine and tranquil, but noticeably deserted. We take the next right, and then another left. The story is the same at every turn. A beautiful, leafy suburban town, entirely bereft of human population. The cafes are free of bustle. The surface of the public pool is still. I even see the school, a row of finger-painted faces smiling at us from the kindergarten windows as we pass by. The building itself is locked up, however, which is odd, seeing as it's noon on a Wednesday. Eventually, the Wrangler pulls onto the first residential street we've encountered. The sign on the corner reads Sycamore Row. The quaint shops are replaced by luxurious houses, all of them identical. White walls, wide porches, and fresh green lawns cut to a uniform length. The road stretches in a straight line for about a mile, creating an eerie corridor of copy-pasted buildings. The strangest thing about the street, however, is vocalized by Rob. In front of every house, a dining room table stands on the lawn, occupied without fail by a family of 4. 1 husband, 1 wife, 1 son, and 1 daughter. They're sharing a meal together. A unit on the left clinks their glasses of orange juice as they dine on pork chops and salad. The family on the right share a large hunk of meatloaf, broad smiles on their faces. Staring along the road, I estimate upwards of 800 people, in neat subsets of 4, all dining at the same time. None of them seem to notice us. Rob lets the car roll slowly down the street, his foot light on the gas pedal, trying to make as little noise as possible. The more families we pass, the clearer it becomes that every single one of them shares a common characteristic. All of them are impeccably dressed. All of them consist of the same subset: husband, wife, son, and daughter. Though their chosen meals vary slightly, they all share a raucous, almost oppressive happiness. Apollo's jokes don't make me feel any better. I feel claustrophobic, trapped. Some screaming animal deep within me knows that it's surrounded on every side by something it doesn't understand. I don't know if I'm imagining it, but as we continue down the road, everyone outside seems to be laughing a little harder and celebrating a little more. We've successfully crept more than halfway down the street. A sharp left turn coming up at the end, representing the road out of jubilation. Another street comes up on the right, Asa Road. While we pass it by, I take the opportunity to glance down this new avenue, curious as to whether every street is like ours. I don't like what I see. The houses are similarly prestigious, the walls pristine white. But, like a spot the difference puzzle, it's the subtle changes that make the picture. There are no tables and no families on the wide green lawns. Almost every window I can see is broken. Cars lie abandoned on the road, with one smashed into a splintered porch. Above every door, an X has been drawn in red paint. And outside of each house, a small mound of clothes lies on the fresh-cut lawn. A huge collective pile of men's, women's, and children's shoes tower at the end of the street, seemingly ownerless. We've reached the end of the street. I breathe a sigh of relief as we bid farewell to jubilation. I vindictively see it off my wing mirror as we turn the corner. I immediately wish I hadn't when, in the split second before it disappears from view, I glimpse the 800 plus residents of Sycamore Row. They aren't smiling anymore, and they're all looking our way. I welcome the forest as the trees rise up around us once more. The indifference of the nature is a welcome change to the faux civility of jubilation. We hurry along the next road and turn right. The further we get from the eerie town of jubilation, the higher our spirits seem to be. I jolt forwards, a sharp pain in my neck as my head recoils back into the seat. Rob has stamped his foot onto the brake, bringing us to an immediate and shocking halt. Before I can ask why, my question is answered, as one of the colossal pine trees slams into the road ahead of us, blocking our route forward. Massaging my neck, I look towards the base of the felled tree. The low end is covered in straight, sharp-cut marks. Someone has brought this tree down, timing its fall in an attempt to cripple the Wrangler. The convoy pulls away, back down the road towards jubilation. Rob waits for Apollo to start moving, then backs up himself. There's a second jolt as Rob abruptly stops the car, surveying our means of egress. Rob's right. Though the tree has fallen across the tarmac, only the thin treetop lies over the grassy bank between the road and the forest. There's a bit of a valley between the edge of the road and the grass, and Rob wastes no time in showing the others how to negotiate it. Twisting the wheel, Rob dry steers towards the gap and proceeds cautiously towards the roadside. I watch the asphalt disappear beneath us moments before the telltale bump. The Wrangler drops down the small bankside and turns around the fallen tree. I watch the needle-covered tip brush against my window as we roll past. With a second bump, Rob brings us back onto the road and pulls us over to the far edge, turning the Jeep to face towards the convoy. As Apollo swerves towards the gap, I hear something, the sound of a running engine. At first, it's so quiet that it's impossible to isolate it from the convoy's own rumblings. It's since grown louder, however, and it's growing steadily more noticeable. Apollo accelerates towards the gap. His Range Rover shudders, banking on the grassy decline, but it's hardly any effort to pull himself around the tree and back onto the road. The noise in the distance grows louder. I can picture the vehicle careering towards the corner, just one turn away from having its windshield locked on the convoy. Though I have no idea what it might be, I just don't want to share any road space with anything coming out of jubilation. The rest of the convoy can hear the noise now. Bonnie and Clyde roll over to the gap and quickly but tentatively push themselves down onto the side. It's clearly harder than Rob and Apollo make it look. After a few moments, they travel across the bank, bring themselves out on the other side. The vehicle turns the corner. A white truck skids into view, its tires shrieking against the road. A metal beam sticks up behind the driver's compartment, and a hook swings with the momentum from a hard right turn. It's a tow truck, though something tells me it's not here to lend us assistance. We still have time to get everyone across, but every passing second feels like a precious, fleeting loss. Eve and Lilith are impatient for their turn, dropping onto the roadside and coming back up in a matter of seconds. The truck is gaining with incredible speed. I can just about make out the words "Jubilation Recovery" sprawled across the hood, though the letters are rapidly becoming easier to read. Blue Jay takes her time dismounting the road. In fact, she's almost casual in how she maneuvers, whittling away at the remaining seconds we have. A swell of anger wells up inside of me as her wheels hit the road again. If she's calm about this situation, then good for her, but I can see Ace drumming his fingers frenetically against the steering wheel, now stranded alone on the other side. I watch Blue Jay follow the rest of the convoy to the next turn, displaying none of the urgency anyone else has shown. Ace takes the corner, heeding Rob's plea for caution, but unwisely taking it almost head on. His front wheel thuds over the edge of the bank, and the chassis hits the tarmac. The drop is just a little too steep for the Porsche's clearance. Rob's warnings ring in my ears as Ace accelerates on three wheels, his car engaging in a slow turn with little forward motion. The pickup truck maintains its speed and aligns itself with Ace's Porsche. Its thunderous velocity defying all logic, all concern for Ace or their own safety. Ace struggles with his seatbelt, stress overpowering his motor functions. He unclasps it and throws the belt to one side. He grabs the door and pushes. It swings open slightly, then immediately slams against the bark of the tree pine. For a moment that lasts all too long, he shares with me a look of pleading terror. The door is slammed shut, crumpling as the tow truck collides with the passenger side of Ace's car. Ace is launched against the door, his head smashing against the window. The ungodly racket of shrieking metal suddenly gives way to silence. I hear Rob rummaging around the luggage as the tow truck reverses out of Ace's Porsche. The hood of the tow truck is completely and impossibly unharmed by the impact, as are its two occupants. They park the truck side onto us, the hook hanging a few meters away from the back of the Porsche. The words "Jubilation Recovery" appear again, now accompanied by a slogan, "Here to help." Two men in white shirts and blue overalls climb out and wander over to the ruined Porsche. They barely seem to register the situation at all, casually chatting together as they throw open Ace's passenger side door. The stunned Ace looks like he's battling a concussion and is only barely cognizant as he's pulled out of the car. He quickly grows more aware as the mechanics grab him by each arm, struggling against him as his captors talk amongst themselves. When I turn around, Rob is stepping out of the Wrangler. Apparently hidden within those neat stacks of luggage was a loaded hunting rifle. Rob raises his stock to his shoulder and repeats himself. The mechanics pay no attention to Rob. They continue to frog march Ace over to the truck, one of them making a quiet joke to the other as they go. They laugh. An awful bang erupts beside me, and a deep roll bursts from one mechanic's torso, blood slowly seeping out of the wound. Inexplicably, the mechanic does nothing more than look at the wound, up at Rob, and then back to the matter at hand. He hardly breaks stride as he continues towards the truck, bleeding freely onto the floor. I hear Rob set about reloading the rifle. The mechanics arrive at the back of the truck with Ace. There are two short loops of thin chain hanging from the lowest of the hook's chain links. The mechanics feed Ace's arms through one loop each, until he's hanging by the armpits in front of the hook itself. Rob fires another shot that goes nowhere. The mechanics grab a handful of Ace's hair, chatting as they do so, and lift Ace's head up until his lower jaw is just above the hook. In that moment, despite everything, despite all my journalistic ideals, my pursuit of the truth, my duty as an observer, I close my eyes. The visual disappears into darkness, but the sound doesn't. The impact and the sorrowful, obstructed groan that follows penetrates my bones, reverberating throughout my very being. Another gunshot, and the sharp twang of a metallic ricochet. Ace's cries continue as the engine starts up and carries him back to jubilation. I hear another gunshot. That sounds like it hits nothing but air. As the engine and Ace's whimpers grow quieter, A few moments pass before one final measured gunshot echoes around the car. The Wrangler's chassis clangs as Rob kicks the side with all of his considerable might. Open my eyes to see a fallen pine tree, a ruined Porsche, and an otherwise empty road. When Rob climbs into the car, it's clear he's trying to regulate his breathing. An internalized rage is lighting him up and is barely under his control. Rob turns us around, pointing the Wrangler back down the road. The quiet of the car echoes in my ears, along with other noises I can't hope to forget. I watch the fallen pine grow smaller in the rearview mirror, overwhelmed by a feeling that I'm leaving more behind on this road than I can currently imagine. Bereft of conversation, of logic, of any semblance of comfort, Rob and I do the only thing we can. We take the next left.